gospel of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ according to John.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. There they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used to steal what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
May God's word be spoken and God's word be heard. Amen. It was the middle of the afternoon. He should have been at work, or perhaps calling on someone in the hospital, but instead he found himself seeking out once more the darkness of a movie theater. Pulling into the parking lot, he looked for a space behind the theater where no one would see his car. A green Ford Taurus the church provided for his pastoral duties. He found a well-hidden spot, put on a pair of sunglasses, and walked briskly toward the front door. He hoped no one would see him, but he could never be sure. The place smelled of smoke and sweat and semen. Once inside, the contrast between the bright light of day and the near darkness of the theater blinded him for a moment. Until his eyes adjusted, he hesitated to move to a seat, fearing that he would bump into someone hidden in the blackness. Standing at the back, he watched on the screen as a woman performed oral sex on 3 men standing in a circle around her. The soundtrack was always the same, perpetual moaning, not all of it convincing. A handful of men sat spaced out in the darkness, like shadowy lumps of loneliness. They turned to look at him when he opened the door, because in a porno theater, nobody likes the light. He found a seat that put the most distance between himself and these strangers, keeping his head low and his eyes averted. This is shame's unwritten script, and as always, he felt deeply conflicted. For some reason, he both loved and hated this descent into mindless depravity. In part, he felt decidedly rebellious, as if he were having the last laugh in this uptight, hypocritical world. Growing up in a parsonage, he had heard lots of sermons about the sins of the flesh. So many, in fact, that he wondered whether his addiction had its root in excessive prohibition. After all, the Word had become flesh, and the church is the body of Christ, so why are we so paranoid about sex? Perhaps orgies are really just the forbidden feast, the anti-Eucharist. Perhaps all this depravity is no more unreal than that of his childhood, the sterile, styrofoam world of the fellowship hall. Perhaps porn is humanity's true nature, stripped of all its clothing, its pretense, its inhibition, its wearisome proprieties. He settled in to watch the movie, knowing that, as always, there would be no plot, just the hunger of bodies beating and mating and of fluids flying. Behold the celebration of carnal ecstasy with no emotional entanglement. Behold our culture's electronic offering to the god of lust. And behold the good reverend, finding himself both aroused and frustrated in the solitude of a secret life. He felt alternately compelled and disgusted, and he wondered what his wife would think if she could see him now. Then he wondered, does she have the same animal instincts? Could she be like one of these women, all hunger and no conscience? The thought both excited and frightened him. Then, as suddenly as the urge to come here had materialized, it disappeared. In a rush of spiritual nausea, he wanted out. He found the images repulsive. He could not leave the theater quickly enough, so he made his way back up the aisle with his head down, again to avoid eye contact. Once outside, squinting in the light of the real world, he took a quick look around to make sure nobody saw him. And then he told himself what he always told himself, that this was a waste of time and money. But most of all, he told himself that it was a waste of the trust that others had invested in him, and he promised never to return again. But it was a lie. Lust is the indiscriminate consumption of the other for purely selfish pleasure. Lest we start to think that we can breathe a sigh of relief this week, sure that at least this one deadly sin we are not guilty of, let me point out that word, consume. We, more than any other people at any other time in history, consume sexuality for our own pleasure. Of course, I'm not talking about participating in sexual acts with others, although online sex is making that easier to do. I am talking about how sex and sexuality has become the focus of much of what we see, hear, and talk about. You cannot check out from the grocery store without seeing headlines telling you about the sexual exploits of people you have never met. Social media keeps us up to date with a variety of issues related to one's sexuality and gender. You cannot watch a movie or a television show without being in the bedroom or any other location, watching people engage in sexual acts with ever-increasing detail. Listen to music and you will also be present for humanity's most intimate acts. Advertisers will promise you that their product, clothing, makeup, food, pharmaceuticals, cars, food, air fresheners even, will make you sexy. We are all consumers of others' bodies for our pleasure. Sex in America has become a spectator sport. Sex is the cure for just about everything. You just need to get laid, is an all too common prescription given to young people who are depressed, frustrated, confused, anxious, you name it. Sex will fix it. The real seduction, if you will excuse the pun, is that sex is empowering. Consuming others, even vicariously, will give you power. It is a form of cannibalism. The subconscious thinking is one of the ancient and primitive peoples. If I eat the heart of the other, I will gain their strength. If I am sexy, if I can seduce, if I can get a piece, I will be better, stronger, empowered. I will be like God. The idea of casual sex is a myth. It contains the promise of something real, but it does not deliver it. It is based on the idea that it is possible to have physical intimacy without emotional responsibility. But if we are honest with ourselves, we all know that that is not possible. If it were, then rape would not be so emotionally devastating. The sexual abuse of a child would not be so heinous. These crimes are particularly disturbing precisely because they violate something deeper than just the body. Only Don Juan sees his sexual conquests in hell and doesn't remember their names. George Viereck wrote a poem around the turn of the last century which speaks to the effects of casual sex. He entitled it, "The Haunted House." And here it is. I lay beside you. On your lips the while hovered most strange, the mirage of a smile, such as a minstrel lover might have seen upon the visage of some antique queen, flickering like flame, half choked by wind and dust, weary of all things, saving song and lust. How many days and years and lovers' lives gave you your knowledge? You are very wise and tired, yet insatiate to the last. These things I thought, but never said, and there passed before my vision in voluptuous quest the pageant of the lovers who possessed your soul and body, even as I possess, who marked your passions in its nakedness and all your love sins when your love was new. They saw as I your quivering breast, and drew nearer to the consuming flame that burns deep to the marrow of my bone and turns my heart to love, even as theirs, who knew from head to girdle each sweet curve of you, each little way of loving. No caress but apes the part of former loves. Ah, yes, even thus your hand toyed in the hair of him who came before me. Was he fair of limb or very dark? What matter? With such lures you snared the heart of all your paramours. Tonight I feel the presence of the others. Your lovers were they and are now my brothers, and I have nothing that has not been theirs. No single bloom the tree of passion bears, they have not plucked. Beloved, can it be? Is there no gift that you reserve for me? No loving kindness, or no subtle sin, no secret shrine that none has entered in? Whether no mocking memories pursue love's wistful pilgrim? I am weary too, with weariness of all your lovers. And when I follow in the ways of other men, I know each spot of your sweet body is a cross, a tombstone of some perished kiss. My arms embrace you, and a silent host of shadows rises, at each side a ghost. With all its beauty and its faultless grace, your body, dearest, is a haunted place. When I yield to passion's swift demand, one of your lovers touched me with his hand, and in the pang of amorous delight, I hear strange voices calling through the night. A rather radical poem for the turn of the last century, but it expresses that idea that when we join ourselves to another, they are never really gone. Rumi, the 13th century mystic poet, said, "Whenever you have sex, you create a child. Not every one of those children gets a body. Take care of your children." Today we know that the sex act can transmit more than just diseases which affect the genitals. HIV is a virus which can lead to AIDS. What else is shared which we do not know of because we can't see it? If there are dangerous viruses, perhaps there are unseen benefits which we need to be protecting. The medieval church offered chastity as the alternative virtue to lust. Since the sex drive is so powerful, they felt the only right thing to do was lock it up, sometimes literally, with a chastity belt. But the desire didn't go away, and the birth rate in monasteries was surprisingly high. So if it didn't work for nuns and monks, it is not going to provide a good alternative for us. The ancient Greeks called sexual desire eros, the name for their god of love. This desire was believed to be the magnetism which holds the whole universe together. Eros, this magnetic desire, is in each of us, and it draws us toward ecstasy. Ecstasy is a state of overwhelming happiness experienced by a mystical transcendence. The ancient Egyptian pharaohs and other cults believed that sexual intercourse led to just such a transcendent experience, and at climax, one could actually see the face of God. If our sexual desire, eros, can in fact bring us closer to God, then the way to protect it from deforming into lust is to regard it as holy. Holy eros requires something more of us than just animal instinct. Rather than giving a false sense of power through using others, it gives us the power of God to transform and be transformed. The practice of holy eros requires something of us rather than being focused on what we get. First, it requires discipline. It is discipline that makes real abandon even possible. Boundaries actually intensify human expression. Establishing sexual boundaries is the first practice of holy eros. To illustrate this concept, a rabbi asked his class what the difference was between a rushing stream and a stagnant pool. The answer is that a rushing stream has banks which are close together and is moving in one direction. The stagnant pool has no boundaries, and so the water goes everywhere and nowhere. So it is with human desire. Holy eros also requires trust, communication, and commitment. Quality, not quantity, is what makes for great sex, not technique. It is not something that can be marketed. When people have affairs, it is not because they are seeking better sex, but they are seeking better intimacy, to be truly known and truly accepted. Holy eros requires giving the other space. It does not consume for selfish reasons. It gives to the other. So holy eros can go without, and it learns how to do this. Holy eros is living a life of being committed to beauty and truth. It is being open to a variety of forms of pleasure and intimacy. This needs to be learned before engaging in sexual activities and continues to be practiced when sex is not an option. It is relating on a deeper level with others and the world around us. The enemies of holy eros are lack of time and fatigue. The practice of experiencing beauty and seeking truth slows us down, revives the body, revives the soul. Laughter is the last practice of holy eros. It is the sound of unconditional love. It is the ability to laugh at oneself and one's lovemaking. We are not perfect bodies with perfect technique. We're fat and sloppy and awkward. The ability to revel in our imperfections makes our lovemaking holy. The benefit of holy eros is that it lasts. It is not a fleeting moment of passion. It sustains itself. It gives what it promises. It satisfies at the deepest levels of desire. It makes sex more nuanced, more sophisticated, more subtle. Casual sex is like Chinese food, satisfying at the moment, but you're hungry half an hour later. Holy eros satisfies for a lifetime. It was the middle of the afternoon, when he should have been at work, or perhaps calling on someone in the hospital. But he found himself seeking once more the darkness of a movie theater that showed pornographic videos. Pulling into the parking lot, he looked for a space behind the theater where no one would see his car, a green Ford Taurus the church provided for his pastoral duties. He found a well-hidden spot, put on a pair of sunglasses, and walked briskly toward the front door. He hoped that no one would see him, but he could never be sure. He reached into his pocket for a $10 bill to pay the man whose face he could not see behind the glass, but instead of the money, he found a note in his pocket. It was a note that his wife had given him that morning. It was a love note, scratched on a textured piece of stationery with ragged edges, and the words were partly obscured by a lipstick imprint of her kiss, puckered into a real oval crease, like the seal of a notary public. He had forgotten all about it. She had handed it to him at breakfast, but asked that he read it later. This wasn't exactly the later that either of them had in mind. It was too dark to read the note, so he stepped outside for a moment, back into the lobby, back into the light, where he unfolded it carefully. As he read the words to himself, he could hear the sounds coming from inside the theater, and it was always the same. Perpetual moaning, not all of it very convincing. In that moment, he was aware of how sadly incongruent this was, reading a love note from one's wife to a porn soundtrack, especially considering that the note was not just from his wife, but from the only woman that he had ever really loved. It was a reminder that while he was away, she missed him and thought about him and looked forward to his return. It was, quite frankly, a rather bold bit of writing for the daughter of such respectable parents. It was addressed not to my dearest husband, but to my lover. And he read it once more. I think of you every day, and it's not just your preaching I love, or your public persona. It's your skin, your shoulders, your hips, and the way you move. I know that you have lots of important work to do saving the world, but don't forget your homework. And if you get a chance, a stolen moment, come to see me in the middle of the day. Signed, your wife and mistress. He folded the note and put it back in his pocket. Suddenly he was aware of the darkness of the place and the way it smelled of smoke and sweat and semen. The words of the note stuck in the back of his throat like a lump, like an epiphany in the strangest of places. He was filled with shame and gratitude all at the same time. Instead of buying a ticket, he walked out of the theater and back to his car, hidden from sight, just like this part of himself. And he promised never to go back, but to go home more often. And he kept this promise.